Use headphones for best experience.
Grimly, the team of now 3 able assault members, Sergei, Sergeant Anton, and Prit Mikhail, pressed on, leaving the injured with a small security detail at the 20-kilometer camp. They had 1 working flamethrower unit left between them and their rifles. Fuel for the big flamer was low after the ambush, but each carried a couple of personal flame torches for emergency. They advanced more cautiously than ever. Sergei's ears pricked at every drip of water, every squelch underfoot. The tunnel stretched like an intestine ahead, and they followed its gentle curve another long distance. They passed the remains of those ambush creatures, finding to their dismay no clear signs of origin. Some appeared to have literally peeled off from the fleshy walls where they lay now as inert clumps. "They spawned from this damn place itself," Mikhail muttered, voicing what they all thought. If the environment itself could create monsters, nowhere was safe. Some indeterminate time later, hours, it was hard to tell time in the eternal night of the tunnels. They noticed a change in the air. It smelled less rancid, more stale and dusty. The fleshy walls receded, giving way to more rocky surfaces. Anton's flashlight picked out ahead a widening of the passage. "Eyes open," he warned. They emerged from the tunnel into a vast cavernous space. The beams of their lights danced across stone ruins of what looked like an ancient village. Sergei's breath caught. They were underground, yet here were buildings. Crude huts made of timber and rock, collapsed cottages, and at the far end an unmistakable silhouette. A church with a tall, spindly clock tower, its face somehow still ticking away with soft clanks. The structures lay at odd angles, as if the ground had partially caved ages ago, tipping walls and roofs sideways. The entire cavern floor here was a shallow basin filled with a shimmering liquid. At first, Sergei feared it was water, but his flashlight revealed a sickening truth. It was a pool of viscous, semi-liquid flesh stretching out in all directions around the village, like a lake of living gore. The rippling, gelatinous surface quivered occasionally, disturbed by some unseen movement or current. Thankfully, the area immediately around their tunnel's mouth was on slightly higher ground. There were islands of solid land, mostly the foundations of the old buildings, rising above the flesh pool. By leaping from one ruined foundation to the next, one could cross without touching the morass. The 3 men exchanged looks of mingled awe and revulsion. They advanced slowly along a toppled stone wall, boots scraping on ancient brick instead of meat for the first time in hours. Nothing stirred in the village. It appeared abandoned, yet given what they had seen via drone and the presence of that fleshy pool, Sergei doubted it was truly uninhabited. The oppressive feeling of being watched was stronger here. Above, the clock in the tower gave a sudden tock, and a bell began to toll the hour in sonorous clangs. The noise was jarring in the silence. Sergei flinched, nearly losing balance on the narrow wall. As the bell's echoes rolled through the cavern, a new sound arose, muffled human screams. It was coming from the church. The men instinctively crouched behind the partial cover of a half-standing cottage. They shone their lights upward toward the source of the cries. High under the church's vaulted stone ceiling, something moved. Sergei squinted. A mass of flesh clinging up there, previously hidden in shadow, was unfurling like a monstrous cocoon. From it descended a series of wooden circles or wheels, 6 in total, lowered by thick ropes of sinew. Each wooden wheel bore a human being bound to it, alive and writhing. Sergei's stomach dropped. The captives were entombed in fleshy growth from the neck down, their bodies thoroughly encased except for their terrified faces. They hung now a few feet above the church's stone floor, arranged in 2 rows like grisly chandeliers. The men's screams and sobbing filled the air, echoing off the ruins. Sergei's heart thudded painfully. He swept his rifle's scope across the prisoners' faces. They were gaunt, eyes wild. One man, older with a gray beard, kept babbling in Russian, "Save me, please, God, save me," over and over. Another was eerily silent, tears streaming from unblinking eyes. On the far wheel, a woman with matted dark hair strained her neck, trying to look around, panic in her voice as she cried out for help. Sergei nearly dropped his weapon. He recognized that voice. "Anna?" he breathed, barely audible. It was his wife. Anna's face was bruised and filthy, but unmistakably hers. Against all odds, she was alive. A wave of emotion crashed into him. Relief, guilt for leaving her behind, and a fierce resolve. Before Anton could stop him, Sergei rushed forward, forgetting all caution. He splashed down from the wall onto the church's stone entryway, wading through ankle-deep slop of flesh that lapped at the foundation. "Anna!" he called, voice cracking. Her eyes found him and widened in disbelief. "Sergei! Oh God, Sergei!" She reached out a hand as far as she could within the fleshy bindings, sobbing. Mikhail and Anton hurried after Sergei, but as they entered the candlelit interior of the church, Anton hissed, "Get back here, you fool!" It was too late. Outside the church, in the darkness of the village, something answered the bell's toll and the captives' cries. A chittering howl sounded from somewhere among the ruins, and then another, closer. "We've got company," Mikhail warned, swiveling his rifle toward the yawning village square. Sergei, torn, stood at the church doorway, one foot inside on stone, the other still in the fleshy muck outside. He saw shapes moving beyond the faint light, infected swarming toward the church, drawn by the sound of prey. "They're coming!" he shouted back to his team. Behind him, inside the church, Anna screamed anew. "They're coming back! No, no, no!" A figure stepped calmly into view at the far end of the church's central aisle, near the doors. The men swung their weapons toward it. It appeared to be a man carrying a torch, lighting candles along the pews as he went. He was normal-looking, not obviously infected from behind, wearing ragged trousers and a heavy coat. He moved with a strange purpose, calmly igniting a series of candles that illuminated the entrance. Sergei's mind struggled to comprehend a human calmly living among this horror. "Sir!" Anton barked. "Get out of here! Will—" But the man did not acknowledge them. He finished lighting the last candle, then hung his torch on a rope coated in flesh that ran up into a chandelier-like contraption above the door. The rope caught fire, burning with a hiss and racing up to ignite a grotesque, fleshy chandelier which erupted in hellish red light. The whole doorway was now bathed in flickering illumination. Sergei saw the captive prisoners clearly, his Anna among them, her chest heaving, and noticed something new. The material binding them was not the usual sickly beige of the infection. It was a deep crimson, pulsing in waves across their bodies. The red flesh seemed almost liquid, rippling as if feeding on their pain. Through the open doors behind them, the trio finally saw what approached. A horde of infected creatures were gathering outside the church, at least a dozen to start, with more shapes lurching in the shadows beyond. They varied in form, some humanoid, others more bestial, shambling quickly, drawn by blood scent and the prisoners' screams. Yet bizarrely, none of the monsters attacked the torch-bearing man. He stood serenely in the center aisle as the infected flooded past him, rushing instead toward the bound captives. "Take cover!" Anton yelled. The three men ducked behind the last remaining pews in the back corner, extinguishing their lights. Sergei didn't want to look away from Anna, but Anton grabbed him and hissed, "If you die, she dies. Hide!" Trembling with fury and fear, Sergei crouched low, peering through a gap in the toppled pew. The infected swarmed the six captives. What followed was a scene from the deepest pit of hell. The monsters tore ravenously at the writhing red flesh that enveloped the prisoners, ripping chunks of the crimson slime away and stuffing it into their maws. The captives howled in agony as this tugged at their very bodies. The red growth was integrated with their flesh. When an overeager creature pulled too hard, it would strip off a rag of the victim's own skin or muscle, eliciting a blood-curdling scream. Immediately, the red fleshy mass would surge to cover the wound again, absorbing the poor soul's fresh blood to regenerate itself. Sergei realized with dawning horror that the captives were being kept alive as food sources, their bodies endlessly nourishing the red growth, which in turn fed the horde. Tears streamed down his face as he watched Anna convulse in pain, with each yank at the ooze covering her. He had to clench his jaw on his own fist to stop from leaping out and firing. Doing so would doom them all. The feeding frenzy went on for an interminable 6 minutes. In that time, more infected poured in, until at least 20 packed the small church nave, jostling and slobbering. The men remained undiscovered, hidden in shadow behind the pulpit's base where they'd crept. Sergei silently mouthed prayers, half to God and half to the demon that ran this place, that Anna would not die like this. Her screams had grown weaker, more a wet whimper by the end. Finally, the gong sounded, a deep, resonant chime from within the church that silenced the cacophony. It emanated from the torch-bearing man, who struck a large iron bell near the door. At this signal, every infected creature ceased feeding at once. They shuffled obediently to the remaining pews and sat, shoulder to shoulder, like parishioners at worship. There were more creatures than seats, yet none crossed beyond the front. Row, clustering instead in grotesque parody of a congregation. Sergei peeked and counted roughly 24 abominations of varying shapes now quietly seated, hunched and twitching, but otherwise still. The torchman, having done his duty, now stood motionless in the aisle. Without warning, his body collapsed in on itself, crumpling to the floor as if all bones had disintegrated. He fell apart into a pile of hollow flesh and old clothing, dead or perhaps just an empty husk that had finished its task. Sergei stared in disbelief. The creatures on the pews didn't react. They seemed to be waiting. From the pulpit area directly above the hidden men, a wet, slurping sound arose. To their left, where a section of floor was missing, the flesh pool underneath began to churn. Something was rising. The men shrank deeper into shadow as a thick pillar of living flesh thrust itself up through the gap behind the pulpit and extended across the ceiling toward the silent congregation. It quivered above the seated infected, an unthinkable appendage of some far larger entity below. For 10 long minutes, the pillar hovered there, utterly still and silent. Neither the infected below nor the captives made a sound now. It was as if all were in communion, receiving unspoken commands or perhaps worshiping their hidden master. Sergei's skin crawled with the sense of an intelligence present. This must be the source, the controlling mind of the plague, communing with its flock. He realized this was their only chance. The creatures were distracted, entranced. He leaned to Anton and Mikhail, whispering almost inaudibly, "We have to free them now." Anton's eyes were hard, but he gave a slight nod. He and Mikhail readied their rifles and a remaining flame torch. Sergei readied his knife. They would have only seconds once they moved. The flesh pillar suddenly retracted, slurping back down into the pool without ceremony. The silent interval ended. The infected things began to rise from the pews, task apparently complete. Before they could disperse, Anton lobbed a flashbang grenade he had clutched since the ambush. It clattered out into the aisle and detonated with a blinding pulse of light and a concussive boom. The church interior blew into chaos, stunned howls from the infected, dust shaking from rafters. In that same heartbeat, the three men dashed forward. Anton and Mikhail opened rapid fire, mowing down the front row of creatures before they could recover. Sergei sprinted directly to the wooden wheel, where Anna hung low to the ground, her head lolling. He slashed at the red tendrils binding her with his knife. The substance was tough and rubbery, resisting the blade. Behind him, Mikhail unleashed a cone of fire with the torch, holding back the bulk of the horde now scrambling to attack, buying Sergei a precious moment. "Hang on, Anna, I've got you," Sergei gasped, sawing furiously. The red flesh writhed, tightening, as if aware of his intent. Anna's eyes flickered open. "Sergei, you came," she whispered, voice raw. He gave a final shout and sliced through a primary strand. The fleshy cocoon peeled away from her body, and she slumped free into his arms, naked and covered in oozing wounds where the red slime had burrowed. She sobbed weakly, clinging to him. Sergei felt hot tears on his cheeks as he held her. Their reunion was cut short by a spear of pain lancing through Sergei's shoulder. He cried out, stumbling. A barbed tendril had shot from the very floor, piercing straight through him just below the collarbone. Anna screamed in renewed terror as Sergei was yanked backward by the tendril that had erupted from the ground itself. It flung Sergei like a rag doll across the church, slamming him into a pile of rubble on the far side. He felt something in his chest crack, either the tendril or his bones. Dazed and choking on blood, he struggled to raise his head. He saw Anton firing in controlled bursts, the muzzle flashes lighting up throngs of twisted bodies. Mikhail was by the door, tossing another grenade out to slow reinforcements. "Sergei!" Anton shouted, eyes wide as he saw his friend impaled. Sergei coughed, tasting copper, and waved feebly. He was alive. The tendril had missed the heart, but he was skewered and pinned against a broken column. Anna? Where was Anna? He scanned frantically and saw her crawling painfully toward the corner, away from the melee, trailing pieces of the red residue. She was alive for now. "Fall back! Get to the buggy!" Anton ordered, retreating to the doorway while peppering the advancing infected. Mikhail grabbed Anna under the arms despite her cry of pain, dragging her toward the exit. Sergei grit his teeth, reaching for the shard of tendril through his shoulder. It was like a hooked meat harpoon, thrumming as if connected to a living fishing line. With a primal yell, he braced a foot on the column and pulled the fleshy spike out of his flesh. Agony nearly made him faint, but he was free. Blood gushed warm under his armor. He pressed a hand to the wound and staggered after the others, each step a battle against blacking out. The church was an inferno of battle now. Several infected corpses burned bright from Mikhail's torch, casting wild shadows. The remaining creatures poured forth in rage. Sergei limped into the open, where the others waited amid the ruins. Outside, the situation was scarcely better. More infected had emerged from the surrounding village, drawn by the sounds of combat and the grenades. The buggy, their intended escape, was half sunk in the fleshy ground where they left it, its tires ensnared and its frame being absorbed by the creeping mass. "It's useless," Mikhail cursed, firing a burst into an oncoming mutant that had once been a bear. The beast roared and fell, but others came behind. Anton and Mikhail formed up, Anna huddled between them. Sergei caught up, clutching his injury, and took Anna's hand. All around, shapes advanced through the gloom of the cavern, dozens, maybe more, converging. A cacophony of guttural growls and slithering noises echoed. They were surrounded. Anton handed Sergei a spare pistol. "One mag, make it count," he said grimly. They all knew how this would likely end. Sergei's heart thundered, not for himself but for Anna. She leaned on him, shivering violently, more red growth sloughing off her onto the ground like shedding skin. Behind them loomed the flickering church. Before them, a mass of nightmares closing in. Anton's face hardened. "If this is it, we take as many as we can with us. Flamethrowers on my mark." Mikhail nodded and raised the last fuel canister. Sergei squeezed Anna's hand fiercely. Her eyes, though sunken and teary, locked onto his. In them, he saw both love and resignation. No, he thought, not after all this. He refused to let this be their end. Suddenly, a shape stepped out from behind an oozing hut, the silhouette of a man wielding a scythe. For a crazed second, Sergei thought the torchman had somehow revived. But this figure was different, taller, more solid, face obscured by a hood. In the gloom, only the glint of the scythe's curved blade was distinct. It moved with eerie silence, flanking their position. "Contact right!" Sergei shouted, swinging his pistol up. Too late. The scythe swiped out, catching Anton across the midsection. The veteran soldier's words died in a wet gurgle as he crumpled, nearly cut in two. "No!" Mikhail roared, turning his rifle on the hooded figure, but it had already melted back into the darkness. Now the horde attacked in force, taking advantage of the shock. Sergei and Mikhail stood back to back over Anna as infected pounced from all sides. Gunshots flashed. Sergei emptied his pistol into a bloated monstrosity leaping toward Anna. It collapsed inches from her, ichor gushing from multiple wounds. Mikhail's rifle clicked empty just as he felt another. A clawed humanoid sprang, and Mikhail met it with a combat knife, grappling even as it bit savagely into his shoulder. Mikhail screamed, plunging the knife repeatedly until the creature fell limp, but its bite was fatal. Mikhail staggered and dropped, neck spraying blood, eyes already glassy. Now it was just Sergei and Anna. The scythe-wielding figure emerged again, striding slowly toward them from behind the ring of lesser infected. It was as if the ordinary creatures were giving it the honor of the kill. Sergei held the empty pistol like a club in one hand, supporting Anna with the other. He was drenched in blood, much of it his own from the shoulder wound. A ragged circle of abominations closed in, hissing and clicking. The scythe figure raised its implement, a rusted farming scythe, perversely mundane, and pointed it at Sergei, almost like a salute. In that moment, Sergei felt an unexpected calm. If this thing was the herald of death, he would meet it on his feet. He gently pushed Anna behind him, shielding her with his body. "Come on then, you bastard!" he rasped at the hooded figure, raising his chin. His voice echoed in the cavern. The scythe man cocked its head, as if understanding the challenge. It lunged forward with blurring speed, swinging the blade in a horizontal arc aimed at Sergei's neck. Sergei ducked under it, the wind of its passing ruffling his hair. With every ounce of strength, he tackled the figure around the waist. They crashed onto the spongy ground. Up close, the figure exuded a foul odor of soil and meat. It was not human. Under the hood, Sergei caught a glimpse of a featureless face of smooth flesh. No eyes or mouth, just a blank slate. The thing was incredibly strong. It wrestled to bring its scythe around. Sergei got a hand on the pole and desperately shoved the blade away. The surrounding infected shrieked in excitement, edging closer in a tightening ring. The scythe figure suddenly drove a knee into Sergei's gut, knocking him off. It rolled on top of him, pinning him. The blank face hovered inches from Sergei's. From within the cowl came a low clicking, almost a laugh. As the creature raised the scythe high to finish him, Sergei's hand brushed something at his belt. A flare. With lightning reflex born of final hope, he grabbed and struck it. The flare blazed to life in his fist. He drove it straight upward into the hooded figure's faceless head. Flames burst and engulfed its side. Hood, the magnesium searing through flesh. The creature reared back, flailing. Sergei scrambled up and, using the last of his strength, snatched the dropped pistol from the ground, leveled it at the burning figure, and pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. The creature, face now a charred mess, stumbled but did not fall. It flung the flare aside and let out a guttural hiss, perhaps a cry of pain or fury. Sergei hurled the pistol at it in frustration, striking the charred head. The thing took a step, then another. Finally, with a raspy groan, it collapsed to its knees, then face forward into the fleshy muck, hood smoldering. It twitched once and went still. Sergei stared, chest heaving. By some miracle, he had felled the scythe wielder, but there were still at least a dozen infected about, now creeping forward after their stunned pause. Sergei backed up to where Anna crouched against a broken beam. He reached down and picked up the fallen scythe, brandishing it with his good arm. He felt giddy with adrenaline and blood loss. "Back!" he roared at the horde, swinging the blade in wide arcs. A few of the more feral infected were cowed, but others hissed and advanced. Sergei knew this couldn't hold long. At least Anna was behind him. If he could keep the beast focused on him, maybe she could slip away. But slip away to where? There was nowhere left. Just then, a thunderous crack reverberated through the cavern. The ground jolted, throwing many of the infected off balance. Another crack, and part of the cavern ceiling split, raining chunks of stone and earth. Sergei nearly fell, grabbing Anna. The infected screeched in alarm. With a deafening roar, a portion of the cave wall collapsed inward near the far side of the village, crushing several creatures under rock. Blinding white beams of electric light stabbed through the settling dust. Flares and floodlights. Sergei's ears rang as gunfire erupted. Soldiers in full tactical gear poured in through the breach, laying waste to the disoriented infected. They swept forward with methodical precision, dropping monsters left and right. One soldier hefted a flamethrower and unleashed a jet of cleansing fire at the church door, where more infected spilled out, incinerating them. The horde broke, some fleeing back toward the tunnels, only to be cut down by sniper shots echoing from above. Relief and disbelief flooded Sergei. Reinforcements had come. "Clear, clear, clear!" voices shouted. In moments, the chamber fell silent, save for the crackle of flames and whimpers of dying creatures. A figure approached Sergei. Colonel Zhukov himself, recognizable by his stature and the gray mustache visible behind his respirator mask. Sergei realized he must be a frightful sight, drenched in blood, wielding a bloody scythe over a wounded woman. He dropped the weapon, raising a shaking hand. "Sergei Zorin, civilian consultant," he managed, voice raw. The colonel's hard eyes softened with relief and something like pride. "Alive against all odds," Zhukov said. He gestured and medics rushed forward to support Sergei and tend to Anna, who had fainted in his arms. Sergei finally allowed himself to collapse to his knees, gently transferring Anna to the medics. As the soldiers secured the area, the colonel surveyed the scene grimly. The flesh pool, the captives, some of whom miraculously still lived, moaning weakly on their wooden wheels. The grotesque architecture of an ancient subterranean village. "We have a lot to sterilize," Zhukov muttered. "But thanks to you, we know where to strike." He nodded toward the hole beneath the church where the flesh pillar had emerged. "Down there, that's where this source hides." Sergei, cradling his wounded arm, followed his gaze. He realized with a shiver that the pillar's emergence and retreat, the quake and collapse, they were not coincidences. Perhaps in slaying the scythe figure, a servant or extension of the source, he had provoked the thing's wrath or desperation, causing instability. Or perhaps it was simply the endgame beginning. Either way, he was content to let the professionals handle what lay below now. A medic tried to pry Sergei away to dress his shoulder, but he shrugged him off for a moment and staggered to Anna's side. She had regained consciousness and was looking around in dazed confusion as two medics cut away remaining red sinews and wrapped her in a blanket. Sergei knelt and cupped her cheek gently. "We made it," he whispered, voice breaking. She stared at him, then at his blood-soaked form, then at the carnage around them. Fresh tears welled up and she closed her eyes, leaning into his palm. "It's over?" she asked softly, through parched lips. Sergei managed a weary smile. "It will be soon. They're going to finish it. We're going home." At that, a sob of relief escaped her, and she fell into his arms. He held her tight, ignoring the pain in his shoulder, and pressed his face into her dirty hair. All around, the soldiers moved with purposeful urgency, setting charges to collapse tunnels, administering aid, cataloging horrors. Sergei and Anna remained on their knees, clinging to each other as if nothing else existed. In that moment, amidst the ruin and grotesquerie, they had found something worth living for. Above them, unseen, the first rays of dawn crept over the Siberian wilderness. And below, in the dark cradle of the earth, the flesh that hates recoiled as men with fire and resolve descended to finally scourge it from the world. If you enjoyed this video, please do not forget to like, comment, or share this video with your friends. Subscribe to our channel to hear more stories like this one.